Estafa. What do you do when a client refuses to pay or argues that the payment should be lowered upon delivery of the product? You take them to small claims court. Yeah, you really do. You take them to small claims court. When I'm talking about, beginning making small claims court is anything under $5,000 now, isn't it? Or is it even more, a little more? I'm not sure. It's been years since I've researched this, but clients do refuse to pay. This is why with a new client, you often want to set terms like 50% upfront and 50% upon delivery, no exceptions. And you can even state, I want it in cash or I want a cashier's check. That is a reasonable thing to do with a brand new client, and to state, hey, with new clients, I don't take anything on faith. You don't take this object from me until I have the cash from you. Those are really reasonable terms. When you know a client, net 30, that means they pay you within 30 days of delivery, is completely reasonable. Even net 35, net 60 sometimes, but depending on the client. But for the most part, for a new client, you want payment on delivery. In this regard, there's a Twitter account that talks all about how clients exploit artists. And one of them is clients refusing to pay for websites that have been built. And then the person who built the website just pulls it offline because they have all the files. Yeah, I love those stories. Clients that argue that the payment should be lowered on the delivery of the product. I don't know what to do with those kind of people. I have not had that happen. I am lucky in that. That can happen, and it does happen, and it's awful. Again, setting really clear terms about the payment up front is vital. And it literally means like sitting down with the client going, this is a $5,000 job. I need $2,000 up front for materials and to get started. I want the other $3,000 on delivery, no mucking about. You can be really, really clear about that. This is your living as well as their living. You're doing a service for them, but they are paying you. You are solving a problem for them. If they refuse you to pay, take them to small claims court. If you have been clear at the beginning and they have signed a piece of paper of the terms of your construction, it should be a trivial matter to get small claims court to force them to pay. When you're starting out, how do you handle the high initial overhead, like buying all the equipment you need to be able to take on the jobs out there? I understand estate sales and eBay lots, but what about the things that you cannot find and are expensive? Yeah, when you're starting out, mostly what you probably have are things like a drill and a jigsaw and a sander, and that's about it. I remember specifically thinking about jobs that would then pay for equipment that I wanted. For instance, for the longest time, I wanted a better sewing machine than this crappy little one that I had. I wanted a FAF. And the FAF that I wanted was, I think, like $350, which was a huge expense for me back in the beginning of my maker days. And I got a job for Old Navy building a store display for them. And that job was lucrative enough and it needed a sewing machine. So I used the job to go buy that piece of equipment. But when you're starting out, how do you build a shop that you want to use to make money when you're not making any money? One of the things that I have done in the past is I have done things where I've done the job for free in labor if the company paid for materials or the tool that I needed to do that job. So I remember bidding for a Shakespeare company, needed a bunch of cheap swords for a show. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make these swords out of wood, like the $5 sword I made on this channel years ago. So take a slat of wood, I'll sharpen it on a belt sander, and then I'll cover it with aluminum tape. So I need all the wood. That's going to cost this much. And I don't have a sander, so I'm going to need the sander, and that's like $100. And so I gave them this bid for making 10 swords. How did this work out? Yeah, it was 10 swords. The sander was going to cost me $100 at Post Tool, which was a great tool store that used to be here in the city. And then the wood was going to be like another $30. So I said, I'll build you 10 swords for $130. if I get the swords back when I'm done. Now, I loved the idea of this deal because $13 a piece for swords is a crazy cheap price. And then I was going to get both a piece of equipment out of it, plus some shop infrastructure, right? Some shop materials, some expendables, and I was going to get the swords back. And they turned that deal down. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But it was a theater company. They had less than no money. They had negative money. But that is a great way to do jobs that are fun when you're starting out. So it's like, let's say your friend is doing a student film or a short for YouTube or whatever. You might offer to do the props for that film and make an arrangement that your labor is really inexpensive, but by paying for materials and maybe a tool or two, you get to build up the infrastructure and the expendables in your shop. I did a bunch of those freebie labor jobs just to build up inventory of nuts and bolts and, like I said, wood and expendables. At the beginning of your career, again, your time is your most abundant asset and the materials are the most expensive. Later on, that inverts. And I mean, I'm still doing a kind of a version of that now. Like when someone calls me up and asks me to build I built the Aztec death whistle for Ghostbusters Afterlife. And my only cost for that was I wanted one of the hero death whistles back from production, which by the way, I still haven't received, Sony. Hey, Sony, you still owe me a death whistle. Anyway, neither here nor there. I'm confident I will get it, and I still have the molds. But doing those kind of jobs for friends is a great way to build up your expendables. My question is about just starting out, whether it be part-time or full-time. How do you go about writing off the equipment that you need? Well, I mean, now this gets into tax law, and I don't know quite how it works these days. There's two ways. You can write off the initial cost of the equipment, or you can write down how the equipment devalues over time. That devaluing of equipment doesn't really matter for hand tools. It matters for things like milling machines and CNC stuff and 3D printers. Those definitely lose value over time, and the IRS lets you deduct that loss in value over time. It really is about talking to a tax professional, though. And there are artsy tax professionals that deal specifically with artists. The first one I found, Laura Breidenthal here in the city, like her husband was a maker. Tad Breidenthal was a wonderful and amazing maker, did all sorts of different constructions. So when I went to her to do my taxes, I knew I was going with someone who dealt with all the same kind of deductions I had. So you might ask your artist friends who are makers, you might ask people that you know who they use for this kind of thing. So rather than give you specific advice about writing off the equipment that you need, and it's really like you can write off, you can't, even though a lot of the loopholes have gone away, you still can write off a lot as a small business. And it's really important that you do that right. Because if you do it wrong, those bills can be debilitating later on when the IRS is like, you didn't do that right, you owe us some dough. Ask other makers, ask other artists who they use for tax preparation. That's often one of the fastest ways to find someone who will be able to answer your specific questions rather than just some mucky muck at HR.